Chapter 1: A Desert of Secrets. In the heart of Nevada's high desert, the land stretches flat and sun-dazed, wave after wave of sagebrush and sand that seems to tremble in the afternoon heat. The sky above is wide and empty, the horizon rising and falling like distant sea. It is a place that asks nothing of you, no explanations, no presents, no ceremony. It simply is. And that is precisely where the story begins. Around 1955, in the tense atmosphere of the Cold War, the U.S. government quietly designated a swath of this empty land as Area 51. Officially part of the Nevada Test and Training Range, the site was chosen for its isolation and sparse population, everything about it meant to remain hidden. The people who bought or sold parcels in Lincoln County found signs swept clean of fences almost overnight, and the bright lines of authority drawn in the dirt. A man named Clarence Kelly Johnson, an aeronautical engineer at Lockheed, was one of the first to know something unusual was happening here. He did not speak of UFOs or aliens, nor did he mention conspiracies. His concern was speed, altitude, and the razor edge of secrecy. He helped design the U-2 spy plane, an aircraft that flew high and silent, gathering its photographs from above the reach of surface defense systems. To the desert, it looked like nothing, just another skybird. But in that emptiness, in that silence, Area 51 became its cradle, its incubator, its laboratory of ideas. Yet secrecy, once stretched, catches sunlight. It begs questions. Word leaked. Rumor built slowly. Pilots and engineers spoke in code, in small rooms, in whispers. They talked of planes that could outrun detection, of test runs at dawn and dusk, engines roaring as though the silence itself was being hunted. They spoke of crashes hidden by the sand, of instruments left behind and retrieved at midnight by men in unmarked black vehicles. These stories never traveled far. Nobody printed them. They were as ephemeral as desert mist, but they were there. By the late 1970s, Area 51 had come to occupy a peculiar space in popular consciousness. It was said to be where the government reverse-engineered alien crafts. It was whispered that crash saucers, saucer-shaped test vehicles, the bodies of non-human pilots, all existed in hidden hangars gouged out of the desert. Ufologists pointed to luminous orbs of light reflected in pilot visors. To gun-toting locals who patrolled scrubland roads on ATVs at night, the place represented a threat. To conspiracy theorists, it represented everything our governments did not want us to know. Even so, airport infrastructure, dull beige hangars, and unmarked gray runways stood in place. Not bristling with alien tech, but humming with human secrecy. An entire network of remote highways led to remote sites lined with sensors and spotlights. Aerial no-fly zones surrounded the region. To many, the public face of Area 51 was a series of empty buildings and empty tarmac, but it was unclear what they were hiding. Yet everyone sensed that it mattered, somehow, that beneath the apparent nothingness lay something far more intricate. Stories circulated by pilots, by line workers, by freelancers dropped into the desert for a weekend. Michael Schratt, a pilot in the 1980s, told of seeing strangely shaped craft spinning in ramp lights, triangles, diamonds, discs. He couldn't explain what they were, but said the air was alive with expectation. Others, like Bob Lazar decades later, would claim reverse-engineering gravity-based propulsion systems, though their stories raised as many questions as they claimed to answer. In every version of the tale, the desert remained silent. The secrets seemed stored in the hush of dawn, in the shifting dunes under moonlight, in the hovering absence of public knowledge. Area 51 had become a placeholder for imagination, the blank on the map where our wildest narratives could land. And for those who watched from a distance, it was the ultimate question mark. As the 21st century dawned, military upgrades arrived. Satellite imagery became publicly accessible. The perimeter fences were mapped, security camouflaged. The U-2's successor, the State Route 71 Blackbird, flew higher yet, but its time passed. Yet still, every time a test run took place, or a foreign spy satellite passed overhead, someone spotted a strange light. Someone took a photo. Officially, the Air Force insisted it was just a test site, a place to develop and fly experimental aircraft. But they did not allow tourists. They denied everything, from ET bodies to mystery craft. Their statements were flat, legal. Their actions, meanwhile, kept the cameras rolling, the fences buzzing, the land blanketed in secrecy. Perhaps that is why Area 51 remains powerful, because we do not know. Because nothing definitive can be said. Because there are no documents that confirm alien hierarchies, or deny them entirely. Because the land stays vacant and yet it is occupied by something intangible, silence, possibility, wonder. As we step forward into this tale, we will explore the origins of the base in greater detail. We'll look at the people who worked there, who watched craft rise and fall, who kept secrets in their pocket until they couldn't. We will trace the stories around UFO crashes at nearby sites, like Roswell's cousin rumors at Groom Lake and beyond. We'll ask how myth overtook memo, how imagination spilled into reality. And we'll do it in quiet, careful prose because the desert asks nothing and often gives nothing until, perhaps, the right moment arrives. Let your thoughts drift along the dusty highways. Let your curiosity flow like heat across the pavement. And if you feel the weight of something unsaid, that is precisely the space we are exploring. When you're ready, we'll move into Chapter 2, Blue Book and Broken Wings, where we trace the earliest encounters between U.S. intelligence and unidentified aerial objects and how Area 51 became a grounded answer in the sky. Chapter 2, Blue Book and Broken Wings. Before there were fences in the desert, before Groom Lake was scraped into a runway, before the name Area 51 existed at all, there were just questions in the sky. They came quietly at first. Lights that moved against the wind. Craft with no wings. Shadows that didn't match their source. During World War II, American pilots reported strange sightings while flying missions over Europe and the Pacific. They called them Foo Fighters, not in anger, but confusion. The objects glowed. They danced. They didn't attack. But they didn't vanish either. And the skies, once only filled with clouds and metal, began to feel more crowded. At first, military officials assumed they were enemy weapons, perhaps advanced Nazi technology or experimental aircraft from Japan. But nothing concrete ever surfaced. The war ended. The world tried to return to normal. But the sightings did not stop. In 1947, a pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying his small plane near Mount Rainier in Washington state when he saw something that would change the way Americans looked at the sky forever. He described 9 objects moving in formation, metallic, reflective, impossibly fast. He said they moved like saucers skipping across water. The press took the phrase and ran with it. Flying saucers. From that moment on, the term became permanent. That same summer, in a quiet stretch of New Mexico desert, something else happened, something that would become one of the most enduring pieces of the modern UFO puzzle, the Roswell incident. A rancher discovered strange debris scattered across his land. Metallic, thin but tough, marked with odd symbols. Military officials arrived quickly, collected the materials, and issued a press release claiming a flying disc had been recovered. The next day, the story changed. It was just a weather balloon, they said. Nothing more. But something had shifted. The public had seen the curtain lift, if only for a moment. And many never forgot what they thought they saw. The government responded the only way it knew how, with structure. In 1952, the U.S. Air Force launched Project Blue Book, a formal investigation into reports of unidentified flying objects. Over the next 17 years, they would log over 12,000 separate cases, each sighting carefully documented, investigated, and filed away. Most were explained: weather balloons, astronomical events, misidentified aircraft. But some weren't. Roughly 701 incidents remained unidentified. They couldn't be dismissed as hoaxes. They weren't aircraft. They didn't behave like meteors or satellites. They simply were. And that was enough to keep people wondering. But beneath the surface of Blue Book was something quieter, something not on the official forms. As public interest in UFOs grew, so did military interest in what people thought they saw. And in the remote corners of Nevada, a new site was growing, not to find aliens, but to hide something else: technology. At the time, the U.S. was deep in the Cold War. Intelligence gathering had become a national obsession. And to monitor Soviet activity from high altitudes, a new aircraft was needed. Something that could fly higher than radar, faster than enemy missiles, and longer than any plane before it. That was how the U-2 program was born. Built by Lockheed's Skunk Works division under Kelly Johnson, the U-2 was an engineering marvel. It could fly at over 70,000 feet, so high that the Earth curved gently in the windows. But it was experimental, fragile, and top secret. To test it, they needed isolation. A place no one would see. No reporters. No tourists. No stray hikers. They found it at Groom Lake, a dry lakebed, flat and perfect for runways, surrounded by mountains and silence. The CIA referred to it as Watertown and later simply as Area 51. From the beginning, the location was never about aliens. It was about shadows keeping projects in the dark long enough for them to become real. But secrecy, by nature, invites curiosity. And the problem wasn't always what was happening inside the base. It was what people saw from the outside. During U-2 test flights, the aircraft often flew above commercial airliners. Pilots and passengers would look up and see a strange craft, gleaming in sunlight, moving silently at impossible heights. The government couldn't explain what it was because they had built it, but they also couldn't admit it. So they let the stories grow. And in that space between silence and explanation, the legend of Area 51 began to take shape. Through the 1960s and 70s, the base continued to expand. New aircraft were tested, some of which would later become public, like the State Route 71 Blackbird. Others remained unnamed, their shapes filed only in memory and rumor. Test pilots spoke in code. Families signed non-disclosure agreements. And over time, Area 51 became not just a location, but a symbol. Project Blue Book closed in 1969. The Air Force declared UFOs were not a threat, but not everyone believed it, especially when the sightings continued, especially near Groom Lake. People began to ask, why here? Why did so many strange lights, fast-moving objects, and unexplained sightings happen near this one piece of land? The answers were not clear, but the patterns were. Every time a new aircraft was tested, triangular, silent, unusual, someone would report a UFO. Every time a program remained off the books, someone nearby would swear they saw something that shouldn't exist. And slowly, the boundary between test flights and extraterrestrial speculation dissolved. The line blurred. The government had created a place of secrecy, but they had also created a vacuum of trust. And into that vacuum came everything: aliens, crashed crafts, interstellar treaties, recovered bodies, reverse-engineered propulsion. Not because there was proof, but because there was silence. And silence, persistent, official silence, can become louder than any declaration. As the next chapters unfold, we'll explore how this fusion of technology and mystery gave rise to stories like those of Bob Lazar, who claimed to have worked on alien propulsion systems at a facility near Area 51. We'll look at eyewitnesses who saw more than aircraft, and we'll examine the people who tried to reveal what they saw and what happened to them afterward. But for now, let's rest here in the long shadow of Blue Book, with questions still unanswered and the desert sky still watching. What if some stories were invented to cover for others? What if not all lights in the sky are alien, but not all are ours either? And what if Area 51 is not where the story ends, but where it begins? Let your mind ease into the silence. Let the lines blur gently between what is known and what is imagined. The answers may not be loud, they may not come at all, but the questions, they remain, and that's where the wonder begins. Chapter 3: The Lazar Lineage. In the winter of 1989, a man stepped into the shadows of late-night television and changed the landscape of secrecy forever. His name was Bob Lazar. He wore no uniform. He didn't speak like a military man or a bureaucrat. He spoke plainly, like someone with a secret he hadn't meant to carry. And yet, what he claimed would send a ripple through the world of speculation that continues to echo decades later. He said he had worked on alien technology, not studied it from afar, not read about it in secret papers, but touched it, examined it, and tried to understand it. According to Lazar, he had been contracted by the U.S. government to reverse engineer a propulsion system not made on this Earth. He said the technology defied traditional physics, capable of bending gravity itself, of moving without combustion, of creating its own field of space. The craft, he claimed, was small, metallic, seamless, shaped like a saucer. Inside, everything was scaled, almost childlike in proportion. He never saw a pilot, never touched a being, but the implication lingered. He said the craft was stored at a facility called S4, a site buried in the hills just south of Area 51. And almost overnight, Area 51 was no longer just a testing ground. It became something else. A vault, a hidden museum of non-human history. Skeptics lined up quickly. Lazar had no proof. His employment records were missing. His educational background was inconsistent. But he wasn't selling books. He wasn't charging for lectures. He was simply speaking. And that quiet consistency made some people listen more closely, especially those who had always suspected something unusual about the base in the desert. Lazar described 9 different craft, each with unique design characteristics. He said some looked like they had been damaged, others like they had simply been given up or delivered. He didn't claim to know why. He only knew they weren't built by Lockheed or Boeing or any firm he'd ever heard of. He described a power source, something called element 115. At the time, no such element had been synthesized on Earth. It existed only on the far edges of the periodic table, speculative, unstable, imaginary. And yet, more than a decade later, scientists succeeded in creating a version of element 115 in a laboratory setting. It was unstable, yes, but it existed. To some, it meant nothing. To others, it meant everything. Lazar never asked to become a symbol. He wasn't polished. He didn't thrive in the spotlight. In fact, the more attention he received, the more he seemed to retreat into a quiet life of scientific curiosity, far from stages or studios. He opened a small company, built simple devices, avoided interviews for years at a time. But his story, once told, never disappeared. It became part of what Area 51 was. Not officially, not publicly, but emotionally, culturally. It placed a new layer over the desert, a second skin beneath the sand, one made not of asphalt or security checkpoints, but of unanswerable questions. And whether one believed Lazar or not, his story aligned with something deeper. The idea that what lies beneath the visible world is not just secret, but foreign. Other whistleblowers followed. Some gave interviews from the shadows. Others emerged with documents, some real, others forged. And in this strange swirl of facts and fabrications, a new kind of truth began to take shape, one that wasn't dependent on evidence, but on consistency, tone, and the feeling that something wasn't being said. People didn't just want to know if aliens were real. They wanted to know who decides what's real at all. Because Lazar's story, at its heart, wasn't just about technology. It was about access, about power, about what governments keep hidden not because it's dangerous, but because it's defining. If we are not alone, then everything changes. Our religions, our politics, our sense of time, even our place. And yet, no documents surfaced. No bodies were shown. No craft were wheeled onto runways for the world to see. Instead, the mystery deepened not through contradiction, but through absence. In the years that followed Lazar's interview, the U.S. government began to respond in quiet ways. Fences around Area 51 were moved back. Roads were blocked. Surveillance increased. Warning signs made it clear entry would not be tolerated. Not for journalists, not for citizens, not even for low-level employees without clearance. At the same time, satellite images of the base showed growth. New hangars, new infrastructure. The airstrip was lengthened. Shuttles, unmarked aircraft flying from Las Vegas to the base, continued their daily routes, carrying workers in and out, their names never public. And all the while, the public image of Area 51 transformed from a secret testing site into something more mythic. Movies picked up the thread. TV shows spun the idea into science fiction. And yet, beneath the dramatizations, a steady, quiet belief remained that something unusual had happened in the desert. That maybe, just maybe, something still was. By the early 2000s, the conversation had shifted again. People no longer asked, "Did Bob Lazar tell the truth?" They asked, "If he didn't, why hasn't anyone been able to disprove him?" And that silence, that long, echoing silence, became its own kind of evidence. Not a confirmation, but not a denial either. What Lazar introduced wasn't a revelation. It was a pattern, a tone, a shape to the silence. And over the years, others would begin to echo that shape, adding pieces to the puzzle without ever completing it. As we move forward, we'll explore the origins of those echoes, the rise of the majestic 12 documents, the murky world of military disinformation, and the strange dance between hiding truth and seeding fiction. But for now, let's sit quietly with Lazar, not as a prophet, not as a fraud, but as something else entirely. As a man who opened a door and then walked away from it, and left it open behind him. Let your thoughts settle like dust across the lakebed. Let the boundaries blur between what we know and what we've only heard in whispers. The next chapter will take us further underground, into rumors of hidden tunnels, subterranean labs, and the web of projects said to lie beneath the surface of Area 51. Chapter 4. The hidden base beneath the base. The desert is wide, but it does not speak. It keeps what it is given. Wreckage, bones, secrets. For many, the mystery of Area 51 lies in what's above ground. Hangars, watchtowers, long airstrips scorched by heat and history. But there are others who believe the real story lives deeper. Beneath the dust, under the gravel, down where the light no longer reaches. It begins with a question that seems simple. If Area 51 is so heavily protected above ground, what lies beneath it? Stories have drifted in for decades, softly like sand on the wind. From former engineers, contractors, people who once wore badges without names. None ever spoke loudly, but if you listened carefully, you heard a pattern. They spoke of elevators that didn't stop at zero, of badge readers with no visible door, of corridors so long, they vanished into silence. Some said the base has multiple underground levels, stacked like hidden floors of a hotel no civilian has ever checked into. Others described a vast network of tunnels, running outward in all directions, like the roots of a forgotten tree. The tunnels, they said, connect facilities buried beneath mountain ranges, lakes, and even across state lines. To the public, such claims sounded impossible, fantastical. But then they would remember places like Cheyenne Mountain, the NORAD command center built into the rock. They'd remember the missile silos scattered across the Midwest, some buried 5 stories down, designed to survive nuclear fire. They'd remember that secrecy often lives below the surface, quite literally. So why not Groom Lake? The theory of underground infrastructure isn't limited to one voice. Over time, bits of testimony have emerged, some credible, others wrapped in confusion. But together, they begin to sketch something faint and unsettling. A story of a second facility. Not Area 51, but beneath Area 51. In these accounts, the lower levels aren't just storage areas or fallout shelters. They are laboratories. Chambers for research not bound by traditional law or oversight. Places where no badge alone grants entry, only something more elusive, need to know. Some claim biological experiments occurred there, projects involving tissue, hybrid organisms, or recovered bodies. Others say the real work was technological. Advanced materials, propulsion systems, physics that bend at the edge of known science. A few go further still, describing beings not human at all, kept in secure sections, studied by teams working in complete isolation. The stories differ, but they share something in common. Each one comes with a warning. The people who speak of these places never do so eagerly. Their voices are slow, careful. Often they change details. Sometimes they contradict themselves. But always you sense something underneath, a tension, like they've said too much even in saying very little. One story tells of a technician assigned to install electrical systems on a classified sublevel. He spoke of narrow corridors, strange equipment, and signs printed in languages he couldn't identify. He wasn't allowed to speak to anyone, not even the other workers. And after 2 weeks, he was reassigned without explanation, without record. Another account, more chilling, described a scientist who once studied aerospace dynamics. After retiring, he confided to a close friend that he had worked for a program that didn't just test flight patterns, but attempted to replicate them, patterns not from Earth. He never said the word alien. He only said it didn't belong here. And then he stopped talking altogether. Skeptics dismiss these tales as imagination, misdirection, fantasy, and perhaps they are. But then the question returns. Why does the government protect this land so fiercely? Why are even its public records redacted, year after year? Why do its employees fly to work daily on unmarked planes, using terminals that don't exist on commercial maps? Officially, Area 51 exists now. In 2013, the CIA acknowledged it in documents, calling it a Cold War testing site. But those same documents say nothing about underground levels. Nothing about S4. Nothing about the web of tunnels that so many have whispered about for so long. The silence again becomes its own echo. And the more the outside world tries to understand, the more elusive the shape of truth becomes. It's not just that things are hidden. It's that what little is revealed is always just enough to distract from what still lies beneath. It's said that some military bases are built with underground escape routes, tunnels designed for evacuation or emergency command. But what if the tunnels under Groom Lake weren't made for leaving, but for going deeper, not away from danger, but towards something else? As we drift further into the story, we must ask ourselves, if such a base exists, sealed beneath sand and silence, what is it protecting? Or more pressingly, what is it protecting us from? In the chapters to come, we'll follow these questions down even stranger paths, through the world of black budget programs, psychological operations, and the thin line between secrecy and myth. But for now, pause here. Let your thoughts move slowly, like air through an unseen tunnel. Let the idea settle, not as fear, but as wonder. Maybe there is more beneath our feet than we've ever been told. Maybe the earth holds not just oil and fossils and stone, but stories. Chapter 5, Black Budgets and Unseen Wars. In the world above, things are tracked. Transactions are logged. Projects are debated. Budgets are balanced, at least in theory. Every dollar spent is supposed to answer to someone. But not all spending follows the rules of daylight. There exists another economy, quiet, untraceable, and buried beneath layers of code words and clearance levels. In government documents, it appears as a single phrase: unacknowledged special access programs, or simply black budget projects. This is where our story leads now, not into fantasy, but into fact. Numbers. Appropriations. The parts of reality so obscure, they feel like fiction. Every year, trillions of dollars move through the U.S. Government. The public sees a breakdown. Defense, healthcare, infrastructure, education. But in the military's corner of the ledger, a fraction is always set aside, not for classified operations, but for unacknowledged ones. These are projects so secret, not even congressional committees know their full scope, hidden not just from the public, but from many inside the very systems funding them. Their existence is often denied, or buried under names that mean nothing to anyone outside the circle. How large is this hidden budget? Estimates vary. Some say tens of billions. Others suggest far more. The truth is no one knows, and that, in itself, is the point. Area 51 is believed to sit at the center of many of these projects. Aircraft that don't appear on radar. Surveillance tools beyond public comprehension. And, if some are to be believed, technology that didn't originate from Earth at all. The funding leaves no fingerprints. No bids. No public audits. Materials are acquired through intermediaries. Personnel are often rotated, compartmentalized, or wiped from official records entirely. And all of it flows through a system built not for oversight, but for plausible deniability. It's here that the lines begin to blur. Because once you accept that billions of dollars can vanish into programs with no names and no accountability, the door opens wider. What else might those funds be building? Testing? Storing? The myth of Area 51 is often framed around UFOs, but perhaps the deeper story is this: the creation of a place where anything can happen and no one is required to admit it. The Cold War gave rise to this philosophy. As the US and the Soviet Union raced to outthink and outmaneuver one another, secrecy became not just a strategy, but a way of life. Innovation meant survival, and survival meant silence. The U-2 spy plane, the State Route 71 Blackbird, the F-117 Nighthawk. Each of these advanced aircraft was once hidden within a black budget, each tested at Groom Lake under the desert sun, and each, once revealed, reshaped global military balance. But what about the projects that were never revealed? What about the ones still flying, unseen? In 1997, a small radar anomaly was detected over the Pacific Ocean. It moved at speeds that no known aircraft could reach, changing direction without deceleration, leaving no contrail, no signal. Military radar caught it, then lost it. The incident was buried. Some believe it was foreign. Others believe it was ours. Tested, refined, hidden. If such technology exists, where would it be stored? If not Area 51, then where? As new questions emerged, so did new terminology. Deep state, continuity of government, breakaway civilizations, words that sounded dramatic but hinted at something real. That a portion of knowledge, wealth, and power may operate separately from the systems the public sees, not with malicious intent, but simply out of reach. Not every black project is sinister. Some are built to protect, to advance, to experiment where failure has no consequence. But what happens when secrecy itself becomes the goal? When knowledge is so concentrated that it no longer answers to law or nation or conscience? That's where the Area 51 narrative begins to shift from secrecy into something else. Control. Because if the public doesn't know what is being tested, then they don't know what can be used. And if you don't know what can be used, you don't know where the limits truly are. The black budget world is not without signs. Contractors vanish behind NDAs that last lifetimes. Facilities appear on maps without names. Entire airframes are developed, flown, and retired all without public awareness. In this system, disappearance is not an accident. It's the design, and that design is woven tightly into the fabric of Groom Lake. The fence line, the warning signs, the patrols, the lack of answers. It isn't just about what's hidden there. It's about what could be. The base has become not just a location, but a question mark made real. An icon of the unknown. As we close this chapter, allow your mind to drift on the current of these ideas, not frantic, not fearful, but simply curious. In a world where governments can fund invisible work, what happens when the work itself becomes reality? And what happens if we're only allowed to know a fraction of it? Let the questions settle. Like paper on a desk, like ash on the wind. Chapter 6, The Mirage Men. Not all secrets are hidden in silence. Some are hidden in noise, lies, half-truths, misdirection carefully seeded like grains of sand, designed to cloud the lens and mislead the eye. In the shadowy history of Area 51, one of the most unsettling tactics is not concealment, but confusion. This chapter is not about technology or even places. It is about people. People who walked between truths and lies for a living. People known only by a quiet nickname whispered in certain circles. The Mirage Men. Their job, if you believe the stories, wasn't to hide the truth of extraterrestrials. It was to make people believe in them loudly, obsessively, and at just the wrong moments. The theory is strange, but not new. It suggests that certain intelligence operatives, especially in the late 1970s and 1980s, intentionally fed bizarre stories to UFO researchers. Not to reveal real alien contact, but to bury something else. Test flights, experimental propulsion systems, secret spycraft that could be mistaken for something otherworldly. And what better cover story than aliens? If a civilian saw a triangular object hovering silently in the sky, they might go to the press. They might go to their congressman. But if they're convinced it was a spaceship from another world, that same story becomes a joke. A fringe theory. A distraction. The Mirage Men knew this. They didn't just spread disinformation. They shaped narratives. Fed documents. Arranged leaks. Staged encounters. And then they watched the ripples. One of the most well-known examples involves a man named Paul Benowitz. In the early 1980s, Benowitz was a physicist and electronics expert. From his home near Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, he began detecting strange radio signals, patterns he couldn't explain. He also began seeing odd lights in the sky. Silent, maneuverable, clearly advanced. He did what any concerned citizen might do. He contacted the government. And then something strange happened. Rather than dissuade him, officials began feeding him information, encouraging his theories, providing him with classified documents, even introducing him to others who seemed to confirm his suspicions. Benowitz became convinced that aliens were working in underground bases, that abductees were real, that the government was involved in an elaborate cover-up. But over time, his health declined. His paranoia deepened. He became obsessed. Eventually, he was hospitalized. Only years later did other researchers uncover what had likely happened. Benowitz had been manipulated, fed a blend of truth and fiction until he could no longer tell the difference. Why? Because he had stumbled too close to something real, perhaps an experimental aircraft program or a classified surveillance system. The Mirage Men didn't silence him. They amplified him until his voice was so saturated with fringe ideas that no one would believe him, even if he had seen something true. This, many believe, is the heart of the tactic. Let people see too much. but then give them a story so unbelievable that they discredit themselves. It's subtle, effective, cruel, and it may explain why so many genuine sightings at or near Area 51 become entangled with the wildest, least credible theories. Disinformation is not just about hiding, it's about layering. One true thing, one half-true thing, 3 fabricated things, and a conspiracy theorist to carry it all. By the time the story reaches the public, it's no longer dangerous. It's diluted, entertaining, dismissible, safe. Over time, the Mirage Men strategy became part of the larger mythos. People began to wonder how many other researchers had been led astray, how many insiders were really operatives, and how many of the most popular stories about underground bases, alien treaties, or recovered saucers were not real accounts, but carefully planted seeds. This tactic didn't just affect public perception. It reshaped memory. Even today, when someone reports a strange craft over the Nevada desert, they may hesitate. Is it a real sighting? A trap? A performance? The doubt itself becomes a barrier. That's the legacy of the Mirage Men. Not just confusion, but erosion of trust. It leads us to ask, what if the myth of aliens at Area 51 wasn't meant to protect alien secrets at all? What if it was meant to protect something more earthly and more dangerous? Experimental drones, unmanned surveillance aircraft, hypersonic vehicles, advanced weapons systems decades ahead of what the public knows. After all, a flying disc sounds ridiculous. But a craft that can silently hover, jam radar, and strike without warning? That sounds like something worth hiding. So the Mirage Men let the public chase lights in the sky. They didn't stop believers. They fed them. And in doing so, they helped bury the truth, whether it involved aliens or not. As we rest here at the midpoint of our story, consider this possibility gently. What if much of what we think we know about Area 51, aliens, abductions, secret treaties, isn't just wrong, but deliberately wrong? What if the greatest mystery isn't what they're hiding, but what they made us believe instead? Close your eyes now if you like. Let these thoughts settle like dust on a forgotten runway. Chapter 7, Dreamland's Inheritance. In maps, it's just another patch of dust. To satellites, it's a scar in the sand. But to those who know, those who remember, the name is something else entirely. Dreamland. It's one of many names for the territory surrounding Area 51. The Groom Lake facility. The dry lake bed turned testing ground. But Dreamland says something the others don't. It's a name whispered by pilots and engineers. A name carried in flight logs, mission briefs, and the unfinished sentences of men who knew too much and said too little. It's not just about secrecy. It's about legacy. By the end of the Cold War, Area 51 had already proven its worth. It gave birth to aircraft no one believed possible. Planes that could fly higher, faster, quieter, ghosts in the sky. Each time the world caught up, the base slipped further ahead, always vanishing just past the edge of public knowledge. But the world was changing. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union was gone. And with it, the original justification for many black projects. So what happened to Dreamland? Did it fade into history? Did the doors close, the lights turn off? Not quite. If anything, the secrecy deepened. Some believe this was the moment Area 51 shifted from a Cold War facility to something more permanent, an enduring hub for projects that needed complete isolation. Not just from enemies, but from the people funding them. The public. This wasn't about building the next plane. It was about building a system. A system that could absorb projects, technologies, even entire philosophies of warfare without oversight, without exposure, and without expiration. A military-industrial complex with a pulse of its own. And at the center of it, Dreamland. Stories filtered out slowly. Contractors with no records. Flights logged under false names. Facilities expanding beneath the desert, not above it. Warehouses that didn't exist on aerial scans last month, but did now. And then there were the people. Men and women flown in on unmarked planes, arriving before dawn, leaving after dark. Their families told not to ask questions. Their roles compartmentalized so deeply that even those working side by side couldn't explain the full scope of what they were building. This wasn't a single project. It was an ecosystem of secrecy. Whistleblowers sometimes emerged, but their stories were often strange, inconsistent. Some spoke of advanced propulsion. others of recovered materials. A few even hinted at non-human entities. But their accounts shared one common thread: certainty. They weren't guessing. They knew what they'd seen, or thought they had. But memory is fragile in places like this, especially when designed that way. It's been suggested that certain programs at Dreamland didn't just build technology. They experimented with perception, sensory distortion, information control, even psychological operations used not against enemies abroad, but on employees within. Because if the human mind can be influenced, altered, or quietly redirected, then secrecy becomes more than physical security. It becomes self-enforcing. An engineer who questions nothing cannot leak anything. A pilot who only sees part of the aircraft cannot describe the whole. A scientist who believes their work is going into a weather balloon or imaging satellite will never suspect otherwise. This kind of control doesn't require force. It requires structure, silos, rotations, compartmentalization. Dreamland was designed for this. Some now refer to it as a deep state within the deep state, not conspiratorial but architectural. A structure built from policies, clearances, and absence. And above all, time. Because the longer something stays secret, the harder it becomes to expose. Documents vanish, witnesses retire, projects shift names so often that even FOIA requests come back empty, if they come back at all. The base itself has changed too. New hangars have been built, new runways. Rumors of underground chambers have resurfaced, supported by strange patterns in satellite thermal imaging. Some say entire complexes now exist below the lakebed, shielded from view and seismic detection. And what about the projects themselves? If we're to believe the breadcrumbs, reports from briefings, anonymous insiders, declassified fragments, then the work includes artificial intelligence designed for autonomous warfare, surveillance systems capable of tracking individuals across continents in real time, craft that use non-conventional propulsion systems possibly derived from recovered artifacts or theoretical physics. Again, these claims sit on the border of belief. But that's where Dreamland lives. It doesn't require belief. It thrives on ambiguity. After all, what's more powerful than a secret? A secret that cannot be disproven. The inheritance of Dreamland is not just the technology tested on its tarmac. It's the philosophy that some knowledge should never be public. Not because it's dangerous, but because it would change too much. Our understanding of physics, our assumptions about history, our confidence in the people we think are in control. As you rest with these thoughts, let them float. Don't chase them. Let them pass like aircraft overhead, seen only for a moment, then gone. Chapter 8, The Blue Room. There are places in the world that exist only in rumor. Rooms spoken of, but never seen. Facilities described in documents that no longer exist. One of those places is called the Blue Room. It doesn't appear on any official schematics. No plaque marks its door. And no one admits to having been there, at least not publicly. But the story of the Blue Room has persisted, whispered among pilots, researchers, and even a few members of Congress who later spoke carefully. The earliest mentions trace back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. This is where many believe the physical remnants of unidentified aerial phenomena were taken, if they were recovered at all. Not to Area 51, not to Groom Lake, but to Wright-Pat. There, in the depths of a restricted building known as Hangar 18, the Blue Room was said to exist. Not a grand chamber, not a vault of glowing orbs, but a quiet room filled with fragments, alloys, fibers, panels, materials that didn't match any known manufacturing process. Too light, too strong, too strange. Witnesses, real or imagined, have described metallic components with a memory, bending and returning to form. Others described symbols etched into surfaces, like language, but of no known origin. Then there are the more dramatic claims. Bodies, biological remains. Preserved, stored, examined in secret by scientists with clearances so high even their existence was classified. To many, these stories sound like science fiction. And perhaps they are. But there are a few details that remain stubborn. In 1960, Congressman Gerald Ford, before he became president, requested an official investigation into UFO sightings in his home state of Michigan. He wasn't alone. Multiple elected officials, military officers, and civilian contractors pushed for answers. Many of them pointed not to Area 51, but to Wright-Patterson, and always to the Blue Room. Even the CIA in its declassified documents acknowledged interest in the base. And in 1985, Senator Barry Goldwater, a respected conservative figure, publicly admitted that he had once asked General Curtis LeMay for access to the Blue Room. LeMay's response? He reportedly told Goldwater never to ask again. In fact, he used stronger words than that. This was not political theater. These were serious men, military men. And they spoke of the Blue Room not as fantasy, but as a location they were told existed and were denied access to. Which raises the deeper question. What was so sensitive? If the room was simply an archive of experimental aircraft debris, why the permanent secrecy? Why deny even high-ranking officials with full security clearances? One theory suggests the Blue Room was not a single location, but a program. A mobile containment protocol. Fragments stored here, studied there. Always moving. Always just out of reach. Others suggest that at some point in the 1990s, after public pressure and leaks, the contents of the Blue Room were relocated. Some point toward Nevada. Others to Utah, specifically Dugway Proving Ground. A few believe they were hidden within private aerospace contractors outside the reach of FOIA requests entirely. And some more quietly suggest that the Blue Room was just the beginning, that what began as a place to store the unexplained evolved into something else, an interface between recovered technology and human ambition. Reverse engineering became more than science. It became theology, a belief that by unlocking the secrets of these materials, we might leapfrog centuries of progress. Some claim this was how breakthroughs in materials science, propulsion, and even energy fields were achieved, breakthroughs that have yet to be revealed because they were born in secrecy and remain chained to it. Still, no photos, no schematics, only stories. But sometimes the consistency of stories matters more than proof. Dozens of individuals, decades apart, describe the same room, the same objects, the same quiet sense of awe. Even skeptics admit something happened at Wright-Pat. Something beyond radar testing or cold storage. What exactly that was, no one can say for certain. And perhaps no one ever will. The Blue Room, if it existed, may now be empty. Or gone. Or renamed. But its presence lingers in every conversation about what our government might be hiding. Not because it confirms aliens or crash sites, but because it represents a simple, unsettling possibility. That we are not just being kept from answers, but from the questions themselves. As you let this idea drift, do so without tension. Let it dissolve slowly like fog against morning glass. Not everything must be known. Not every room needs to be opened. Sometimes the mystery is the point. Chapter 9. Signals from the silence. The sky is quiet, but it is never silent. Even in the emptiest places, across salt flats, above mountaintops, deep beneath the sands of Nevada, there are whispers. Faint pulses. Bursts of energy that flicker across radio bands and radar sweeps like shadows across glass. Some of them are natural, lightning from distant storms, solar interference, the hum of the earth itself. But others? They don't belong. They're too regular, too focused, too purposeful. Over the decades, researchers and hobbyists alike have turned their ears toward the skies surrounding Area 51, hoping to catch something unintended. And sometimes, they have. The earliest intercepts date back to the 1950s. Amateur radio operators reported sudden bursts of high-frequency activity, often in the early morning hours, originating from nowhere they could trace. Short, coded pulses. Bursts of static. Strange modulations that didn't match any known aircraft communication or military band. At first, these were dismissed as background noise, random anomalies. But as the decades passed, patterns emerged. Some transmissions repeated. Some responded. Some vanished the moment they were triangulated. One of the most curious phenomena occurred in the late 1970s. A small group of civilian listeners using modified scanning equipment began picking up what they called control ghost signals, brief voice transmissions in monotone English, always speaking numbers or colors, never identifying themselves. Bravo 6. Wind vector green. 39 Delta. Confirm 0 approach. No visual. Repeat. No visual. The voices were emotionless, synthetic. Not computer-generated, but lacking natural rhythm, as if read from a script or filtered through machinery. They always stopped within seconds of being discovered. Then there are the so-called pings. Low-frequency pulses, often just a few milliseconds long, that repeat at irregular intervals. Infrasound researchers in the 1990s noted that these pulses often coincided with nighttime flight activity over Groom Lake on nights when no official flights were scheduled and no aircraft were visible to the naked eye. These pings were not just radio-based. Some were seismic. Others were electromagnetic. Some even interfered with digital watches and car alarms in nearby towns. And then there were the blackouts. Entire blocks of radio spectrum would go dead for hours, no civilian chatter, no air traffic control, no navigation beacons. Just silence. Not random, but absolute. Some suggest this was intentional, a kind of electronic scrubbing field, perhaps linked to advanced jamming or stealth technology. Others believe it was more than that. Proof of devices that manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum in ways not yet publicly known. In one case, a team of researchers from a European Aerospace Institute recorded a sweeping, low-frequency tone while conducting ionospheric measurements near the U.S. Southwest. The signal lasted just under 20 seconds, then ended with a sharp harmonic spike. The source was triangulated, somewhere near Groom Lake. They described it simply as not naturally occurring, not accidental. But perhaps the most haunting reports come not from scientists, but from airline pilots. Commercial crews flying the Las Vegas to Reno route have occasionally reported strange radar returns, solid blips that appear briefly on cockpit displays, fly parallel at impossible speeds, then vanish. Like someone peeking, one pilot said, just to remind you they're watching. Air traffic control logs rarely reflect these encounters. Officially, they didn't happen. But cockpit voice recorders sometimes tell a different story, quiet moments of confusion or silence broken by words like, "Did you see that? Nothing on TAS. Keep it between us." So what are these signals? Not messages exactly. Not evidence in the traditional sense. But signs. Echoes from behind the curtain. Signals that suggest presence. Activity. Experimentation. Some researchers believe they're linked to exotic propulsion testing, craft that bend gravity or space-time fields, sending out unusual frequencies as a byproduct. Others believe they're linked to communication systems not yet known to the public, quantum entanglement, subspace resonance, even biologically integrated tech. Wild theories? Maybe. But over and over, the same fact returns: the sky above Area 51 is alive with something. Something carefully monitored. Something never explained. Something that doesn't want to be heard but can't help leaving traces. In 2013, when the U.S. government finally acknowledged the existence of Area 51 by name, it said nothing of these transmissions. No confirmation, no denial, only more silence. But in that silence, there is rhythm. If you listen long enough, not just with machines, but with attention, you might hear it. Pattern, a signature, a presence that never speaks but is never absent. The sky remembers. Let that thought settle now. No need to make conclusions. Let it drift as signals drift, faint and persistent across the black. Chapter 10, The Door That Never Opens. There is a building in the desert. Unremarkable in design. Featureless. Windowless. Painted to match the landscape so well it nearly disappears under the midday sun. It has no sign, no path, no visible means of entry. But everyone on the inside knows what it's called. The door. Not a literal door, perhaps. More of a name, assigned by those who worked nearby, who walked past it, who were told, don't ask. A threshold. Place you don't go. A room you don't speak about. Some say it's a vault. Some say it's a lab. Some say there's nothing behind it at all, just the memory of something that used to be. But if Area 51 has a heart, this is where it beats. We've come far, through stories of aircraft and anomalies, secrets and science. We've listened to the intercepted signals, the missing files, the shifting shadows. We've traced the whispers of the blue room, followed them through the silence of the sky. But this final mystery is the hardest to see. It isn't about technology or aliens or crash disks. It's about why the mystery remains. Why, in a world where almost anything can be tracked, leaked, filmed or streamed, this one place stays untouched. Not just by civilians, but by time. Year after year, decade after decade, Area 51 expands. New hangars rise. New runways stretch into the sand. New fences go up and the boundaries push outward. Yet no official tour is given. No press conference ever held inside. No one says, here's what we've done. The secrecy is total. And in that silence, the myths have only grown. Some say the door guards what we're not ready for. Others say it hides what we've done, projects we shouldn't have built. Weapons that were too successful. Discoveries that defied control. And still others believe the door is empty. That the real secret isn't inside, but in the performance of secrecy itself. Because when you hide something long enough, people stop asking if it's true. They begin asking why they were never allowed to know. Area 51 may no longer be just a place. It may be an idea about control, about silence, about how power survives. A door is a promise. It tells you that something is on the other side, but it also tells you you can't have it. Not yet, not ever. That's why it never opens. Because what matters isn't the contents. It's the act of denial. The reminder that there are things you are not meant to touch. Not because they are too dangerous, but because they are not yours. In the end, maybe this is the final shape of Area 51. Not a base, not a facility, but a mirror, a reflection of our deepest human fears and fascinations. That we are not alone, that we are being watched, that someone somewhere knows more than they are saying. And always just beyond our reach, a door, waiting, silent, closed. Let that image stay with you now. Not to provoke or disturb, but to settle like dust on glass. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts recede into the vastness. This is the end of our journey, but not the end of the mystery, because some stories are meant to remain unfinished. And some doors were never built to open. Good night.